Okay, everybody, I'm going to record now.
Hello, welcome to AIGA's Fireside Chat. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin our Fireside Chat today, a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing post-event. We are also live streaming to our followers on LinkedIn and Facebook. Please remember that all AIGA events follow our code of conduct. Please connect with us and share your thoughts. The hashtags for this fireside are AIGA Design and Future of Design. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Bennie F. Johnson, AIGA's Executive Director, and today's guest, designer Randy Hunt. Bennie?
Thank you, Amy, and welcome all to today's episode or edition, if you will, of our Design and Leadership Fireside Talks. Today, we have a special guest, and we've jokingly said, design never sleeps, but it is uniquely aware of time zone differences. So for the first time, we have a fireside chat. Randy is coming live from Singapore, and I'm broadcasting from DC. So it gives you a sense of our global scale and reach today. But I'm happy to bring with us Randy Hunt, who needs no introduction, but I love to talk about the fact that he's an award-winning designer. He's an entrepreneur. Fast Company has deemed him one of the most creative people in business and the companies and organizations that he's led. He's an adventurer, and he's really a student of thinking about the future of design and work. Randy most recently headed up design for Grab. And Grab is considered one of the super apps based in Singapore. He's led a team that he grew of more than 130 product designers, researchers, writers, engineers, problem solvers, and illustrators, overseeing the group's businesses that meet every essential human need: transportation, food and grocery delivery, logistics, digital banking, financial services, and telemedicine. Grab was listed number 2 as one of the companies changing the world and having a positive impact over the last 2 years of the pandemic. Prior to his adventure at Grab in Singapore, he was head of design for Artsy platform and head of design for Etsy. Randy has been an entrepreneur, award winner. At Etsy, his work won the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for corporate and institutional advancement. He's also an author of Product Design for the Web, in which he explores the evolving discipline of product for today's designers. He also co-founded Supermarket, a curated design marketplace. It's in this capacity, and as we talk about, Randy has been for years an active writer, critic, and visiting designer at many colleges and universities as well. So without further ado, I introduce to our fireside the one and only Randy Hunt. Welcome, good sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone.
It's really great to have you here. And, in our conversations, I'd like to start off with this question. One of the things that I noticed, it's really been a throughput in your career, whether it was Supermarket, the curated designs marketplace, or your work at Etsy, or even some of the work that you've done at Grab, there's this notion of economic empowerment through design. Speak a bit about that and how that's been a throughput over the years. That it really shows up when you look back over your career in those spaces.
Yeah. Nice insight. Yeah. Well, I think also when you look back,
Right.
The path can really look rational, or it all kind of like makes sense.
Right.
Of course, as it's happening, it didn't necessarily feel that way all the time. Although maybe underneath there were some interests or themes. Yeah, and I think that. For me personally, when I was much younger, I was, had started several different small businesses. I started and ran a record label, I ran a small design studio, some other things that kind of predate, the things you listed in the introduction. And that was really meaningful experience for me in that it felt both creative from sort of a problem solving standpoint, like running these businesses and starting them. But it also felt really kind of like liberating or empowering to be, kind of a more full agency over what was happening, to make decisions that mattered, to decide what to focus on and do was always just attractive to me, like at that stage of my life. And maybe it channeled some of my like punk rock energy into something like really productive or something. And so I was really attracted to that at a very like personal level. And then I started to, I think, just kind of become aware of the fact that many other people have that same experience, or have that same desire to have that same experience. That's this, I've got this business idea and I want to get it off the ground, or I have this product idea. And, I think that that appeal was something I could relate to and understood was often more sort of universal. At that level. Then I think the next layer, as time passes, I see that my understanding of the world gets a little more nuanced and sophisticated, and probably less self-centered. And you start to understand, or I started to understand that the way in which one can like earn money, essentially, or sort of like create value and be compensated for it in the context of sort of how our economic system works, is there are like a lot of constraints and sort of a lot of opportunities. And sometimes it is difficult for people to pass from like one to the other, to go from the environment of constraints to the environment of like seeing this as possibilities and having that same thing I saw as kind of like creative self-expression. They might also see that way it leads to like a fulfilling life experience, maybe to sort of drive one's own sort of making one's living, right? Like sort of on your own terms. And that doing work that helps enable that became like very meaningful or appealing to me. And so that was, I suppose if we zoom way out, we could call it design, which is okay. We were talking about design at a big scale. But I think that in a much simpler way, it was just like what these businesses were about. Like the nature of kind of a marketplace business, and I've been involved in many marketplace businesses. You have some like supply side of this marketplace that has some service to offer or goods to sell. And when the people operating that supply side of the marketplace are individuals and small businesses, the success of the whole enterprise is predicated on creating success for all of these individuals and small businesses. And that I find very meaningful work. It relates to that path of kind of moving from one economic position to another, and the freedom to kind of control one's make one's living on one's terms, or more so. And I find that easy to wake up every day and be motivated to work on in a really simple way. I'm like, yep, I can feel proud of that work in that context. And I think that has then probably led to a series of decisions over time that looks like keep working on that. Yeah.
So when you think about this, and really this conversation at the micro level, when you went to Grab, you're listed as one of the fastest growing startups. So moving in scale, but still talking about impacting lives in Southeast Asia in ways that you can become a part of Grab's mission and platform. So what were the biggest challenges you had from going from, working with the smaller businesses in a very direct way to this larger platform?
Yeah. So I think the challenges are many, but I think while the platform is larger, meaning there are more participants in the marketplace, both the general consumers consuming the services as well as people supplying them. So maybe we'll take a very specific example that everyone can relate to at this point. I think after 2 years of lockdowns and quarantines and working from home, like food delivery as one of the services that we offer. We're headquartered in Singapore, but actually across Southeast Asia in 8 different countries. So Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Cambodia, and then actually Myanmar, which of course our business in Myanmar is in a very different position after the overthrow of the government there. So wild things that happen in other parts of the world. So in the context of like food delivery, a vast majority of the food businesses that people are buying from, through our software platform, are extremely small businesses. Sure, there's a chain restaurant as well. Sure, there's maybe McDonald's or a Jollibee or something, and that exists as well. But the vast majority of them
majority
are
of your platform, right?
What we would call like a mom and pop shop in the States or something. But what that looks like is sometimes a food cart, like a non-permanent food cart on the side of the road in like Jakarta in Indonesia or something, right? And the challenges are less about the scale in terms of the size, but I would say the challenges are about the variety of customers and their needs and experiences because of that size. So we have this very informal food cart example, right? Which is very likely owned and operated by the same person who does all of the work. Like they're buying the raw ingredients on their way to their cart, they're pushing the cart around, they're making the food, they're selling it. The entire thing is happening with this one individual. And then at the same time, you might have a small restaurant also in Jakarta, or someone who maybe owns 3 or 4 small restaurants in Jakarta. These are still pretty informal. They may have even been primarily cash businesses 24 months ago or something.
Wow.
Family owned and operated. And then you might have someone in Singapore that is a small restaurant group, right? Which is still in like a global sense, very much a like small or medium business.
Right.
But you might have restaurant managers at 5 locations. They might have, 50, 60, 70 employees across these multiple locations. And what you need to create as a software experience to enable all of the transactions to happen for those different kinds of users are pretty radically different. Even though to you or I, if we were going to order food from them, we'd probably pull up a menu, we'd search for maybe what we liked, or we'd see it was close, you'd say, I like that delivery time, and you'd hit order. So the consumer experience is similar-ish. But underneath, those businesses and the conditions they're operating in are pretty radically different. And that, I think, is where some of the biggest challenges is kind of what we would call like hyper localization. Yeah.
Wow. It's really telling for everyone in our audience. Randy was stateside, and you decided to take this adventure to pack up and take on this business challenge to move to Singapore. So I have 2 questions for you. Like, how did you feel about taking this leap? And 2, how has this experience made you a better designer and design leader?
I mean, I felt both, nervous and excited, right? Or I suppose like anxious in both, all senses of the term. Yeah. It was I think I was ready to experience something different at a professional level, right? And that was, I think, driven by feeling like I had, my experience has been that I have like very steep growth curves, and then things will kind of like level out, and you have to create change to experience some other kind of growth experience, right? Sometimes it's in the same company or role, sometimes it's switching companies or industries. And I felt like I was at one of those places. So I got very curious about how I could create like some radical growth. And as I looked around at the other possibilities that seemed more obvious to me or natural based on my geography, the industry I was working in, my existing network, these things, none of them felt very radical, and kind of like done a number of that were similar and were quite, successful through various, commercial lenses or my own qualitative assessment of them for like how proud we are of the output and things like that. And so started to look further afield, both conceptually or like metaphorically, and then it ended up being like quite literally on the opposite side of the planet. And that was very intentional to change context in a pretty like radical way. And so I was also feeling quite like, while nervous, also proud of it, I think, for myself, for being willing to take the risk or something like that, Yeah. Well, the second part of your question was, how did this make me, I think, a better like design leader, better leader? I think that the cultural context is one very different. And so I think that just forces you to be even more adaptable, more open-minded. You know, I would consider myself a quite like open-minded person, and but like, yeah, the cultural context is just different, and it forces, you know, lots of different interesting learnings from life experience, and we could dig into those or something. The other is, I think that it helped me see that even more that there are many ways to accomplish things. You know, there are many like methods, many approaches, and there's not really like a way, you know, and you can arrive at good outcomes through a number of means. And also that what identifies something as, you know, a good outcome can also change in the context, you know, both like the cultural context, but also the industry, the moment of time in that industry. Yeah, just a number of things. So I think it left me feeling less certain, but in a good way. Yeah,
right.
I'm like even more open, I suppose. Yeah,
be more open to the change in the space in there. So,
yeah.
you know, one of the things that I thought was really interesting when you look at, actually, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to go back a little bit. I was reading one of the pieces you wrote almost about 10 years ago now in Fast Company. And it was your thoughts on design. And it was this conversation about cleverness and how sometimes we may, in love of our own design, get in the way of our true impact in space with being overly clever. I love for you to give me a couple words on that. It's been about 10 years since you wrote that piece for Fast Company. And I wonder if you still feel those same. For those who haven't had a chance to check it out, I give you a reading assignment for this weekend to check out Randy's piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so
and I took you back. That was a surprise for you because I read that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I mean that particular sort of article, if you will, this like essay is expanded upon in the book that I wrote that was published in maybe 2013 or something to kind of place that in time. So yeah, even that is almost a decade ago. So the point I was making in this piece was really around I think based on observations I'd have around common behaviors that were happening in the industry at the time, particularly with many new people coming into the software design space, often from other design fields and disciplines. And this is still happening today, but it's, you know, things have evolved again in many ways, with I think more of an emphasis on what today I would call, you know, like brand design or something like that. And maybe sometimes putting an overemphasis on the stylistic layer of the designed experience, from the writing standpoint, you know, kind of sometimes missing utility, or compromising utility a bit much, by my opinion, you know, for the sake of trying to be expressive and things. So there's a bit of a argument for a more rationalized like approach to creating the software experience. I believe this is still a good point of view in general. However, I think we've also arrived at a place, and maybe this is in fact relevant to the experience we were just talking about, like here in Southeast Asia, where when you're trying to establish, I believe, like new behaviors for, you know, customers, consumers, users, whatever the terminology might be, your audience, right? Sometimes like being like very clear and direct and simplifying and kind of like letting the things be what they are without dressing them up too much can be effective in helping people truly understand the thing, right? Which is different than maybe making the thing attractive to them or capturing their attention to want to understand the thing. So there's a distinction, yeah. But this like directness allows you to, I think, sort of educate in a way, implicitly. You know, the thing is so kind of simple and clear, and it says what it does. You know, it's all quite straightforward. The challenge though with this approach, if I could like disagree with my past self or get more nuanced, is that One is the point I made about sort
I
of
love it.
attracting people to things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
And
the
that
thing
was the
must
reason
be
I wanted,
appealing.
yeah, I wanted, when did you have the chance to do that? It's always good to kind of challenge our own words and think about it. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think the thing must be appealing, right?
Right.
And that the stylistic layer plays a role in creating like an attraction or a desire or a curiosity or interest that might bring one to use, try, engage with something. The other, from sort of like a business standpoint and kind of like a competitive standpoint, is that, you know, if I rewind 10, 15 years, the kinds of things we were working on were in many cases very novel. Like they were, if not the first, they were very early in a kind of experience like this. And in some cases, like an Etsy or something, it was one of the first sort of like successful like social commerce things in that like generation. You know, we'd see like an older experience, something like an eBay or something that was evolving, but kind of in this moment in time, it was a bit of a standard bearer, right? But as time passes, those things that are novel and new start to become normalized. Even they kind of like spread into the culture, like
Right.
other products, business and services start to adopt those same patterns because they sort of work, and then because they're adopted, they become normal, you know, and it all starts to feel like default, right? And the same. That's really good from like a usability standpoint. I can kind of move around between a number of things and expect them to work similarly. I think we're seeing something like this right now with the kind of like TikTok style, like full screen, but like flip the video to the next thing, or, you know, Instagram stories, like the side thing that was happening in Snap. But there's a few of these behaviors that start to become so normal, you see them somewhere else and you automatically know how to do them. That's great. The problem from like a business standpoint is that the thing I was maybe advocating against, the cleverness and things like that, things that make the experience maybe more unique, which could potentially be less straightforward, like a little more poetry in the experience, also maybe what distinguishes it from other things that are largely similar, right? And so now it becomes a point of differentiation. If we're looking at sort of commodity products in a way, if I think about the things I was working on at Grab, at some level there's like, you know, we were the leader in nearly every category in every market we were operating in, but that doesn't mean there weren't competitors. And to, you know, deliver food from A to B or provide some service is largely a commodity service. Like you can, you know, other people can offer the same thing, you know, you might eat on price, but at some level, if you're just competing on price, you know, down, that doesn't fit the model. So you have to become attractive and appealing to the customer for other reasons. Yeah. So then you're wanting to distinguish yourself and be different. And so all of those, you know, if you reduce the thing to its pure utility, the most straightforward, understandable, usable part of it, and have massaged out any sense of things that might create an emotional relationship for the consumer, you're sort of missing the opportunity from like a business strategy standpoint to attract or retain customers without essentially like buying their loyalty with cheaper prices or discounts or something like that. Yeah.
Now, when we think about that kind of maturation arc, right, coming in on platforms where they're new and new ideas, that's something that's another thing that's been a hallmark of your career, being early in creating the spaces. We've been talking a bit about, you know, what's next on the horizon in our conversations and firesides. And a lot of the conversations have stemmed around design's role in problem solving in the fintech space, or kind of the next level of engagement around that. What are some of your thoughts about what's next for design as we think about these other opportunities?
Yeah, sure. I mean, gosh, there's a lot. It's a lot happening. You know, at some level, it's, you know, design's moment. It kind of feels like that.
It really does.
It's happening over and over again, but it feels like one of those moments now. I think we can't ignore the sort of macroeconomic conditions that inform that have to do with, like, you know, particularly as we look at the technology parts of this space, because of the funding models and venture capital and the potential for software scale businesses to operate extremely efficiently, as they mature. That, there's a lot of capital looking for places to go that has the potential to, have greater returns than elsewhere. So there ends up being a lot of money flowing through the system, which means a lot of, there's just a lot of activity, happening very quickly, and lots of people taking risks and bets. That's an important, the context that some of this is happening in.
Right.
And that's why you see, like, I think
right.
Yeah, explosion of like fintech stuff is, I think, in part because the space had moved slower for a while, but the other part is, like, with lots of capital reserves and things that feel different than even like a decade ago or something. Smaller, like, upstarting companies can do things like lend money, these sort of like Klarna and, Atome and these kind of pay later services that have kind of come out of nowhere.
Right.
I feel like they've come out of nowhere in the last like 4 or 5 years and are now, interest-free for installment payments kinds of thing. It's like highly, competitive space, super hot, really fast. That's very interesting to see. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it's interesting. Yeah.
Right.
Because they get rapid changes in consumer behavior, powered by like the availability of software, its willingness to, take risks, to market itself very aggressively. But at the same time, it is forming maybe habits or expectations of consumers. It's offering a product that, through the critic lenses, is effectively like, unsecured, loans, effectively like high interest loans if you default on these things. And some would argue creates like spending patterns that are unhealthy, or a relationship with those spending patterns are unhealthy. Others say, like, this is amazing. People are getting like approved for a short-term, financing on something that wouldn't get approved otherwise, because we're not going through typical kind of like credit approval processes and things like that. So I think that's very interesting. What is happening, just an example of these kind of like pay later services. The larger space, what is most interesting about that is how fast it has happened.
Right.
And then how fast the businesses like come to exist, grow, are copied in a way. The business model is replicated, whether it's, across regions. Hey, this is working in that, it's working in mainland Europe. Let's do it in Australia. Fast, boom, same idea. Before the competitor expands globally, we're going to like do it in the local market and get a stronghold. You see this happening like very, very quickly. But the other is actually, the regulatory conversation around these things,
right,
is quite dynamic as well, which I find also interesting. Again, not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes, yes, good or bad, but like largely I find it very intellectually interesting. And in some cases, we feel like, the regulation is very slow and trails the kind of business innovation. But in other cases, like, regulators are acting quite quickly in some cases, and maybe like aggressively in some, cases and in some markets. And I think that makes for a very exciting climate to go sort of be working in. Yeah.
I think so. And so many of these ventures are from the start richly design driven. We were saying before that they're starting in, they're not waiting to grow into being design forward. Many of these ventures are starting.
This is true. Yes. And I think you're seeing, there is more often you're seeing something that, I would say, the baseline level of sort of the design execution, the user experience thinking, the kind of like customer experience lens being elevated quite early.
Right.
Which is super cool to see. But interestingly, I think many of these organizations, many of these brands or businesses or products, then hit another, we've like made this amazing thing happen where like often the design isn't there at the beginning. They're competing from a brand positioning standpoint very early as well. These brands are like dynamic and really nicely executed. In-house teams and design firms and studios around the world are doing like, exceptionally good work on some of this stuff. It's like really, really cool to see. but as they grow and scale, there's still seems to be a lack of almost like the industry can't support the organizational needs and the growth needs as quickly as they're happening in the businesses.
Right.
So I mean, the number of sort of like head of design, VP of design job openings at many of these organizations is kind of baffling.
Right.
While they struggle to, I think, find and make successful the qualified candidates. I don't actually think there's a lack of the qualified candidates, but I think maybe in any particular market or niche, there might be a mismatch, but there are many capable people who are qualified for these roles in the industry. But I think the way that the industry finds, identifies, evaluates talent
right.
is somewhat of a mismatch. So that's why I say like they can't quite keep up,
Right.
because what you may need is someone to need to take a risk on the leader, because actually the person who's available and capable and interested in that space doesn't have a track record of doing the job before that you need them to do, right? They're like going to be a first-time VP. So you have people making like very aggressive business growth choices, very conservative like hiring choices. Like, oh, we're looking for the person who's done this thing before. But some of these things are so novel, but there are very few people who can, who can say, I've done this 3 times before. That's like the battle scars
that's an incredible, that's an incredible point. We always see in innovation spaces in there. Organizations will say they want novel, new, or innovative, but to your point, the default in hiring becomes the classic, have you done this before in a space that looks just like it? And it's really impossible to do that when the spaces are shaping up the things that we haven't seen before, or spacing in a space that there hasn't been that space. What advice would you have? I mean, one of the things that you've been able to do is kind of break through in a global sense. What advice would you have for members of a design community who are looking to take this next level risk? What can they do to become their own advocates for jumping into some of these opportunities with success?
It's a great question. I'm slowly considering the answer. I think this is very kind of like tactical, like practical advice. My first answer, which is, I think that there are many third parties recruiters that are, hired by a number of these companies, or sometimes they're investors who represent often many roles inside many organizations simultaneously, that are just an extremely powerful kind of like entry point into the space. And I find that, these good recruiters or headhunters or whatever you want to, call them, right? Their interests are quite aligned with yours, like they want you to get the job as well. Yeah.
Right.
The whole model is predicated on that working, and so I think in some cases it's like having just being aware of that. I mean, some people in the design industry are very, very aware of this practice, and almost like having recruiters work on your behalf, like to take you inbound to, organizations or connect them with their clients. But if you are not, you should, look into that. Maybe we can share some resources with the organization later or something. And they have likely helped represent and position people with similar backgrounds and skill sets as your own into these kinds of roles before. They're doing this all the time, so they may understand what works from a, what things to emphasize in the experience, or how to who and how to kind of enter the conversation with the organizations, because they know their clients, or they know these clients they've worked for in the past. They know these roles. They know the personalities of the hiring managers or the founders of the companies, and can help you bridge that. So it's not all on the design leaders, shoulder in a way, right? They're kind of expert in that bridge building, and I think a large part of it is around helping see it's about potential over experience, or potential as much as experience. And so communicating how, it's less about the evidence of have you done this before? And it's more about the evidence of having successfully figured out to do things you have not done before.
Right.
Right. Like that's the key story in the track record. And then it becomes, I think the positioning becomes more precise around either relevant industry experience, relevant personal interests, finding parallels between, the specific experience you have and this other experience that maybe the organization may not see, but that you can kind of help them understand through like metaphor, through storytelling, through case studies, that, everybody has a customer acquisition problem, right? Everybody has a user retention problem. Everybody wants more engagement. Everybody needs to operate the team more efficiently. And some of these problems and themes are quite similar. And so, no, it doesn't look like, you don't have 20 years working in like climate tech, right? But you do maybe have experience being a team with a strong reputation, with low attrition in a second tier city where the talent market is smaller. And like, that's an interesting position now, that says like, this is a unique match for this organization because they want to build, they're trying to build team in maybe a lower cost market, or it's very important for their business that they're geographically located around the same thing. You have experience in places like that. Yeah. So I think it's about kind of like, finding the less obvious, but relevant evidence, that kind of fills in the gap between experience and potential. Yeah.
So thinking about potential, we're going to spend a bit to look at the year ahead. What gets you excited, my brother, about 2022? We're closing out the year now, and we have this whole new year ahead of us. And from your perspective as a design leader and a strategist, what are you most excited about for 2022?
Yeah. Oh goodness. I think that for sure, I'm quite excited about I think there's a number of emerging technologies that they feel emerging in the like zeitgeist. They've existed in the background for a while.
Right. They're coming into their moment.
I think yes, it's kind of like the end of the beginning in a way for a number of interesting technology things. And as a person who works very close to like sort of software product design and technology, like this is meaningful and fun to me. I don't know if I'd ever call myself a technologist, but it's close. Yeah.
We'll go for it for today.
And so, yeah. Okay. So I think, one sort of like blockchain technology and a number of the things that are kind of loosely under the umbrella of like Web3, which, as someone who's like active in the space, also doesn't really know how people are defining it. At any moment, it's gotten kind of like messy. There's been drift, I think, in what the words mean. But I think that this kind of next chapter feels like the next chapter at like a consumer internet level is becoming more prominent. That has to do with both, permanent record enabled by blockchain, anonymity, like the potential for anonymity, but also the history. So there's an interesting tension of ideas, right? I have a history of all sort of transactions or activities that can be relatively, anonymous, is designed to kind of have anonymity. But at the same time, because it's decentralized and I own my, I have agency over my thing. A lot of what we talk about right now is currency, and it's like I can be my own bank and like the cryptocurrency lens. But maybe if we abstract it even simpler, like I own my account. Right. So as opposed to having like a Google account or a Facebook account, I have my account, and this concept of that account and its identity can be portable across different parts of the internet, right? And so you have anonymity, but you also have like a portable identity. Right? So you could choose to associate that, it could be you, Bennie, or it could be you under some pseudonym, or you a string of numbers. Doesn't matter from a technology standpoint. The tension between these ideas, permanent record, anonymity, portable identity, to me is like very intellectually interesting, but I think it starts to create both very interesting experience opportunities we can create, potentially value for users to have more control over their assets and their activity. It also creates, I think, there's business potential. There's also interesting like risks and interesting, I think it's still a relatively complex space. And
Right.
so as it gets more exposed to the general consumer, it goes back to this effective and clever kind of a dilemma in some way, which is like, how do people understand how to participate in a safe way? How
Right.
do they, protect themselves, their data, their assets? How do they sort of live a secure existence in the context of this technology change? I think is very emergent and important space for like user experience designers. I suspect we will see a number of the sort of academics and critics who really look at things like this through a ethics lens to have a great number of new subtopics in a way to issues to raise, I think, to us as like practitioners to consider and take responsibility for, because it seems as though this next chapter that's starting will likely affect a number of things in our lives in ways we have not seen yet. That's exciting to me. I mean, that's probably where I'm most excited personally and like spending time and energy, but I'm also quite enjoying watching the sort of augmented reality space in particular developing, because I think we're seeing consumer utility there and in like meaningful ways. It's kind of gone beyond prototypes or like niche kind of like, technologist nerds or industrial applications or military applications to like more everyday uses, starting to work largely like, having fun in games and like, filters and Snap and things, but it's starting to,
it's starting to find a utility and value, right? It becomes a little bit more meaningful, right?
It does. It's really, and it inspires. I think, we imagine it as somehow, I think it's a common pattern, especially at a consumer level, that happens where it's like, it's on the edges, it's like entertainment, or it's, these other things, which for a lot of people, it's like, that's not for me, or I don't get it. Then we start to see it come closer with some utility or emotional connection. So yes, we see all the fun, face filters on Instagram or something. And then I think the other great example is Google like walking directions. The Google directions where you hold up your phone, you're seeing, the world behind you live through the camera, but augmented with, you should turn down this path and things. I mean, it's quite a sophisticated problem to have resolved. It's really cool. I think the UX of these is done like quite elegantly. So that's great utility in and of itself. But what I find most exciting is that once people experience something like that for the first time, then they start to like imagine or accept that there are many other yet unrealized possibilities that have similar utility.
Right.
I think we're seeing the same thing happening in the sort of, cryptocurrency space and other things where once someone has a meaningful engagement with it, not news headlines, not hype cycles, not, big numbers or lots of fraud, but a more, intimate experience around it, where they experience something that is either very fun for themselves or it feels like it has utility, and they really see like kind of a loop get closed or a transaction happen and how it is different. They become then quite open to, I think, imagining and inviting in the other areas of utility. Yeah,
I think that's incredibly powerful when you think about that adoption. So you go through, it's the novelty and it's on the edge and it's the fun, it's what other people are doing, to then having these ways that it shows up meaningful. So I can't believe we are at the end of our time that we had allotted. I know we could sit here and talk forever, but I just appreciate you coming in, and I want to invite you as we talk about the future. So I'm extending a future invite to you, my friend, for us to get together for a fireside this time at the end of next year. And we're going to do the same thing and look back and see what has grown and what surprised us this year. But Randy, I appreciate you once again. I invite everybody to join us for our firesides. Today, we were with award-winning designer, entrepreneur, technologist. My friend, for today, you're a technologist. Creator of dynamic brands, looker into the future, builder, creator of opportunities for economic empowerment, and overall humanitarian. Randy, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate your camaraderie and your insight, and thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man.